Coming up on this episode of Game, it's a post-apocalyptic wonderland as the fragate takes a trip through the wastelands. We bounce our way through what we think are the best online catches of the week. And we take an inside look at how the boys behind Ghost Recon imagine war in the future. Consoles at the ready, boys. This is Game. Hey fellas, what's new? Welcome to another episode of the only show that brings you a fresh fry-up of the bold and the beautiful in the world of teeny tiny animated characters ripping each other's heads off or blowing them to pieces. Lovely. So on this episode of Game, we're going to deliver what many of you have asked for. Now, there have been pleas from you on our Facebook page asking for our thoughts on Rage. So, Fraggy, our game guru extraordinaire, skipped his anger management class this week and got himself all riled up for an angsty time with id Software's brand new baby.
Ark survivors are worth a lot of money to whoever hands them over to the authorities.
There are people who stand up against the authority. You could be useful to them. They call themselves the Resistance.
Our group is small but dedicated.
Elizabeth tells me you're a man we can trust. Someone who can help us in the fight against the authority.
Fraggy here, back in the gaming den this week as we check in with a game which has been getting all the shooter fans excited since it was first announced back in 2007. It's Software's Rage. Now, if you haven't been keeping up with the news about this game, Rage is first and foremost a shooter set in a post-apocalyptic wastelands of Earth, many years after an asteroid hits the planet. And while the gaming landscape has seen its share of games like Borderlands and Fallout, which use the exact same premise, the reason why so many gamers were looking forward to Rage was simply the fact that it comes to us from id Software, the godfathers of the first-person shooter, a company which brought us the classics like Wolfenstein, Doom, and Quake. Built using a cutting-edge video game engine called id Tech 5, id Software's new kid on the block promises a new level of fidelity in the graphics department, running at a silky smooth 60 frames per second, even on consoles, and a new mega texture system which allows the developers to uniquely paint the world. So, interesting new technology to go along with a spanking new game. But I guess what all the shooter fans want to know is the actual game any fun to play? Or have the boys at id somehow lost their Midas touch? Well, my friends, lock and load, because we're about to get into the meat and bones of one of the most highly anticipated FPS games of this generation. So, let's find out.
Saving you may have changed all that.
Now, the thing that most gamers will probably want to know is how's the actual shooting? And I'm glad to report that on almost all fronts, the combat in Rage is definitely one of the highlights of the game. Building on their long history of delivering awesome action, the shooting in Rage feels excellent. You start the game off with a highly underpowered pistol, but from your humble pew-pew beginnings, you slowly start to amass a healthy collection of munitions. From shotguns to crossbows to assault rifles, the guns in Rage all work beautifully, and once you get a few dollars, can be upgraded for things like quicker reloads and lower recoil. In addition, each of the weapon classes can also equip up to 4 different types of ammo. From pop rockets for your shotgun, to electricity bolts, and even mind-controlled sniper rounds which allow you to take over and blow up enemies at your will. Plus, you can even craft items like wing sticks and sentry bots, all which help keep the combat fresh and interesting. Now, aside from the gunplay, another one of the reasons why the shooting in Rage stands out is due to the animation system, which I can safely say is one of the best in a shooter so far. Enemies don't just run towards you, they jump and dodge realistically, moving from cover to cover in a stylized dance of death, which should keep even the most hardened gamers on their toes. And finally, I love the art design, which gives you a great sense of a world that's been lived in. Very Mad Max, very cool. Now, the main flaw I found with Rage was that while id Software does get a whole lot of things right, you know, like the shooting mechanics and the enemy artificial intelligence, certain other aspects like the story, well, they're not as polished. Now, John Carmack, id's founding father, has once famously come out saying that story in a game is like story in a dirty movie, in that it's expected to be there, but it's not really that important. And I can't help but feel that despite their best efforts, the story in Rage never really captured my imagination. Characters, even though well designed, all act like cardboard cutouts whose only purpose is to stand around and give you tasks to complete.
You're gonna need to return there and retrieve that drive. Do you understand how important this is?
In addition, technically, if you're playing it on a PC, there are a host of problems related to textures popping in, especially when you enter a new area and the game starts to load the graphics. And even once the graphics are loaded, extremely low resolution textures mean that the world looks really pretty from far. But once you get close, it's far from pretty. And finally, my biggest gripe comes from how the world is designed. I do feel that a lot of this is wasted on the fact that almost no shooting takes place on the overworld. Instead, all the missions pretty much involve you having to drive to a location just to open a door where the real level begins.
Well, will you look here? A new face, a new body. Oh, I am so glad I got out of bed this morning.
I mean, why give you such a big open world to explore and then not include anything worth exploring? You know, in the end, Rage really feels like an early FPS corridor shooter which was brought kicking and screaming into this generation of games. A generation which seems to be obsessed with things like open world exploration. But the problem is that aside from the kick-ass combat, most of the other additions feel weak, especially when you compare it to other games released this year. Sure, the driving elements are a nice distraction, but ultimately, the main reason to play Rage is for its combat, which sadly only makes up about 1/3 of the whole game. And the fact that there's no deathmatch multiplayer mode is almost unthinkable for the guys who pretty much invented the genre. Now, don't get me wrong, when it gets into its stride, the shooting in Rage is really something. But I guess it's up to you to decide if that alone is worth the price of a full game.
You can shoot stuff and drive a kick-ass off-roader. Way too cool and not to be missed, guys. And for those of you that have already had a go at it, well, why don't you tell us what you think on Facebook? Now, why don't we get our emotions under control and take a quick break? But don't even think about touching that remote, because when game returns, we're going online, unearthing precious free-to-plays with a punch. And we take to the derby to demo games we think you should try before you buy. and welcome back to the most awesome show all about the weird and often wonderful world of video games. You're with me, Kelly, and it's time to get back to work. So grab your helmets, recruits, and get in them tanks. It's time to blast some bots to Kingdom Come. This is Online.
In this week's pool of overflowing online goodies, it's military might and miniatures as we check in with a curious little action title all about planning and battle know-how. In Think Tanks, don't let the colourful levels fool you because this game isn't quite as easy as it looks. Requiring keen planning and strategy, keep an eye out for bullets that bounce off the walls or you may just end up killing yourself. So if you like what you see and you've got a mind to give it a shot, Think Tanks can be played by following the link below. Next up, basketball fans reeling from the NBA lockout, listen up. With the 2012 season in jeopardy, here's an easy way to get your hoop fix without spending a dime. In basketballs, no pros hogging the limelight. Instead, you and your team need to score through every basket in order to beat the level. With bonus points added for knocking out the refs, it's also got a great sense of humour when it comes to the sport of hardcore 5